What's up, everybody? It's your favorite FPL YouTubers back at it with another preview and analysis video. This time it is our second preseason video for the upcoming season. And for the topic of this video, there's probably a lot of different debates going on in FPL managers' minds right now. We're here to settle some of those and raise some new questions. So without further ado, I'm Jarrett.
I'm Evan.
And this is How to FPL.
So, some of these questions and debates that are happening in the FPL community, we've kind of written down here. So these are the main ones that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, there are loads more to talk about, and we will get to those in other videos. But for now, we're going to cover Mo Salah or no Salah. I know that a lot of people are talking about this. You see a lot of people who going without Salah who are getting shit on in FPL forums. But there's definitely a case to be made. Same with Kane versus Holland. Really heated debates going on about that one. We're going to talk about some of our mid-price mids and city mids, especially at that 8.0 price point, which is something a lot of people are talking about. And then we're just going to talk about general team structure, 5 at the back versus 4 at the back, stuff like that. And finally, Jarrett will give us a little bit of insight into something everybody has been wondering, which is, are Man United back? So without further ado, let's get right into it.
Yeah, so if we're looking at the if we should bring Salah into our teams or not debate, obviously he is the greatest FPL asset probably ever in the game. So you need to keep that in mind. He also has pretty amazing fixtures in the medium short term. Including an opening day game against Fulham, who just conceded 5 against Benfica. So, that sounds pretty good for captaincy. And he also has historically started the season really well. Even if we're thinking about last season where he very much fell off towards the end of the year, he got most of his points in the first half of the season, where he just went on an absolute tear, and you were not going to be a good FPL manager if you didn't have him. Obviously, the major con is how expensive he is at 13 mil, especially when you see Luis Diaz coming in at 8 mil, and you think, what else could I do with that extra 5? And that is a question that I think more FPL managers should be asking themselves. But obviously there are, 3 very good Liverpool options in Trent, Robbo, Diaz, and they are all significantly cheaper than Salah, and so you could get all 3 of them and save a significant amount of money. And the money you save could be used to have, Kane and Haaland, for example. That was a debate that we're going to address later, but you could have both of them if you don't have Salah. So any thoughts, Evan?
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much summed it up, but it really is. You could see if Diaz gets off to a flying start, let's say the first game, he and Salah each put in 1. You could entirely see that happening, and they assist each other. And all of a sudden, you're looking at other teams that have Diaz over Salah, and they still have Kane to play.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, man, well, I hope it won't go like this the whole time. And you start second guessing yourself, and people, scramble to sell Salah. But at the end of the day, I think that's entirely, what I've just done is constructed a possible narrative of how the first game week will play out. I think it's equally possible that Salah puts in a hat trick against Fulham, who don't look very good. And Diaz kind of fails to impress, and everybody that doesn't have Salah gets left in the dust. So there are really, nobody knows, but I think that looking at everything on the whole, I think that it's probably a smart idea to have Salah in your team.
And we'll get more into why that may be.
Yeah. So our next topic of discussion is Kane versus Holland. Obviously, um, this is a this is sort of a similar situation where you can spin it two different ways, and you can make it seem like one of these players is so clearly the one to go with. You know, Kane, you're comparing somebody who has years of Premier League experience with high goal tallies to someone who's brand new to the league, and people brand new to the league historically don't have, stellar seasons right off the bat. But then on the flip side, City have been needing a striker to finish all the chances they create, and all of a sudden they're bringing in one of the best strikers in the world, and he only costs 11.5. And he's 65% owned or whatever he is, and you're telling me that you're not going to start with him. And so it's so easy to construct these narratives. I think either one is a good choice, but I do think that whether you go with one or the other, maybe could be dependent on how much risk you're willing to take, just because of their differences in ownership. Any thoughts, Jarrett?
I would actually frame the risk argument in the exact opposite way as you did. In case it's not clear yet, I currently have Kane in my team, and Evan currently has Holland. So we are a little biased in this argument. Kane, if we're thinking about Kane last season, he still did pretty well. And he started absolutely abysmally because he only played, I think, 2/3 of their games. Or only started in 2/3 of their games in the first half of the season, and his stats were terrible. He wanted to transfer to Man City, so he wasn't even trying. And then Conte came, and he all of a sudden just turned it on, and he looked like his old self. And he's looked like his old self again this preseason so far. So I would argue that he's actually the less risky pick. Even though his ownership is significantly less than Haaland's right now. Haaland is new to the league, man. And yeah, City scored the most goals in the Prem last season, but they're gonna have to change their system a little bit to adjust to him. And how quickly will they do that? I think that's a valid question to be raised. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and something that I hadn't really thought about. Should we move on?
Sure. All right, so then kind of transitioning into more team structure discussion. The mid-price mids at the 8 million price point have been a pretty hot topic on Twitter. I know I'm on FPL Twitter a lot, but in the community in general. And so we've kind of tried to identify who we think are the best and who we think are the rest here. So, the most exciting ones are definitely, in our opinion, Luis Diaz and Riyad Mahrez. Luis Diaz joined Liverpool in January, and with Mane leaving and Jota apparently injured for the start of the season, he looks pretty nailed to start the season. And so, if you're thinking about essentially the Mane replacement in their old system, for only 8 mil, that's a pretty appetizing asset. And then we have Riyad Mahrez on the other hand, who he's kind of regarded in the community as a major troll, but two of his main competitors for starts just left the club. Sterling signed for Chelsea and Jesus signed for Arsenal. So I think his biggest competition now for starts is going to be City's new signing Alvarez, who I honestly know nothing about. But I would think Mahrez is pretty nailed to start the season. Fingers crossed. And he has great stats. We know he scores goals. We know he gets assists. And he's also a pretty selfish player, which means he will get you those FPL points when he's playing. whether City fans like it or not. Then if we're getting into the sort of next tier of the 8 mil mids, we're looking at Mason Mount and Bukayo Saka chiefly. Saka looks as nailed as they come in the Arsenal attack. And I would expect his attacking stats to get even better this season than they were last year. The only reason really that he's ranked as low here as he is because most people are probably going to have Gabriel Jesus in their teams. And thus, they've got the, I hate to use this word, but they've kind of got the Arsenal attack covered, and could replace him with other 8 mil mids. And then obviously we have Mason Mount here. He's probably pretty nailed in the Chelsea attack. It remains to be seen what system Chelsea will play and where he will play in that system. So he could potentially be a really valuable asset. He could potentially not be as valuable as we are currently thinking. But a lot remains to be seen based on Chelsea's preseason games there. He's definitely one to watch, and he could turn out to be a very high-value pick. And then as far as the rest, Phil Foden triggers me. I think a lot of us had him for a significant part of last season, and he just his underlying stats are always great, and he just consistently fails to deliver, which is extremely frustrating to own him. And I would argue if you're looking at an 8 million City midfielder, unless Bernardo Silva leaves, I would think Mahrez is probably the better pick than Foden, just because he when he plays, his returns are better, and he's looking like he's probably more nailed for the upcoming season. So I think that would be my pick. And then James Maddison, he ended the season last year really well. Leicester don't have European competition, so that's a big plus. I personally would probably wait and see on him, just because he is kind of not an extremely consistent player generally. And yeah, I would just wait and see on him, to be honest. Thoughts, Evan?
I think you've summed it up very well. I think the only other thing I would add is that it's pretty cool that we have so many players like this that are all at the same price point, so that if one of them does pop out, or even someone else who is around that price point that we haven't mentioned, it's a very easy switch. So I think that it's really important for everybody to have at least one player in this price range to enable a switch to whoever actually pops out. You may as well take a gamble on whoever. There are so many promising looking picks, so just pick one, and if it's not the biggest deal if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So team structure, definitely a really interesting preseason as far as team structure discussions. I know one of the biggest ones that a lot of people are having is how many defenders to play. And I think that before Neco Williams made his transfer to Nottingham Forest, there were a lot of people going 5 at the back. You would already see, like, some people were going 4 at the back, some people were going 5 at the back. It was at the very least 4 at the back, but a lot of 5 at the backs, with the cheapest defenders being 4.5s, 5s, stuff like that. I think that now that Neco Williams has transferred, I think that changes things, because all of a sudden you have this 4 million playing defender, the one that we look for every season. He's showed up. He's probably going to rise in price over the course of the first few game weeks. So it can be really helpful to help your team value to have him in your team right away. I think it leads to adding him to my team led me to a structure like we see on the right here. That's 4-4-2. And I just think it makes a lot of sense to have a structure like this where you can have Neco and Andreas. Those are two players who you're happy to have on your bench. But you're happy to have them, but you don't need to play them. And they'll be getting consistent, at least 2-pointers, one would hope. So I think that's an interesting aspect. Another thing that people are talking about is how important is flexibility this season. Obviously, you definitely want to have more than one playing striker. I think that teams with Holland and two 4.5s or Kane and two 4.5s, I've even seen Jesus and two 4.5s. Um, just not the move because those 4.5 strikers aren't going to play, and you're literally subjugating yourself to a terrible bench when you could have midfielders or defenders that are 4.5 that actually play or get plenty of points if you switch your formation up. So that's why team structure is so important. Obviously, covering key price points. We talked about that with the 8 million mids, but I think it's also important for to have a striker that's in the 11.5 range. I think you would probably agree, Jarrett. Um, and then obviously defenders, it's maybe not quite as important. But then yeah, play the fixtures. We've got a lot of wild cards, so there's nothing wrong with you know stacking your team with players who have good fixtures from the start. Um, and then the last thing, just template versus differential picks. That's a similar vibe. We have the wild card, so you can go differential, but Jarrett, you probably have some input on this and the other questions in this slide.
Yeah, as far as the template versus differential question, I historically have always tried to be a little too differential at the start, and that always costs me early on, and then I'm playing catch up all season. It has worked out for me the last couple of seasons, but if I want to get a top 10K finish, for example, I should probably play it safe at the start. And I would recommend other people to also do that. It can be tempting to grab the differential, the guy who's new to the Premier League, who everyone thinks is going to be really hot. Haaland might be an exception to that, but generally, you want to stick with some tried and true players. And then back to the kind of just general team structure and flexibility. I think strikers are a pretty hot topic right now, just because of how poorly that category performed as a whole in the last season. And I think it is important to understand that past data is not always going to be a great predictor of future performance. Last year was weird, to be honest. Like, Kane obviously sucked, and Lukaku was awful. Ronaldo was kind of touch and go. Vardy was hurt for most of the year. Like, most of our strikers just weren't really there, And I don't think that it is very wise to go into this season expecting things to necessarily be the same. So I would encourage people to kind of keep an open mind on those strategies and try to stick to a good structure where you can maneuver to different price points, kind of like what we're talking about right here.
For sure. Should we move on?
All right. The final question of the evening: are we drinking the Ten Hag Kool-Aid? And I think that is a question that a lot of FPL managers are going to be asking themselves right now. United have looked very hot in preseason so far. Rashford, Martial, and Sancho have all been getting returns so far. I didn't personally watch the United games, but I've read a lot about how far up the pitch Diego Dalot in particular is getting. And, that's a defender-only price at $4.5 million. It's got to be a little tempting, especially with United's fixtures. But, obviously there's a ton of value to be had in United's midfield if they're going to be playing like a team that should be challenging for the Champions League, which they probably should be, for a Champions League spot, not the trophy. But, besides maybe having one of them in your initial squad, I would say it's probably still kind of wait and see at this point. If they continue to look really hot in preseason, more people might be jumping on the bandwagon, but it's very much wait and see at this point, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've both got Rashford in our teams, but besides that.
All right, well, having said all of this, make sure to like and subscribe, smash that bell buttons to get notifications on every upload. Maybe leave a comment. Evan will definitely respond. I probably will. And then check us out on Twitter and Instagram.